What's going on, gamers? This is Pepper Coyote, and I'm here. Sure, let's go with that today. Or should we say service workers? Lumpen proletariat? What's up?
Lumpen proletariat?
What?
As
That's
in
a real
we
word.
are lumping service workers and the proletariat together, or are you asserting that the proletariat are lumpy?
No, this is like that's like a Marxian term. What's up, baristas and other people who've been? All right, there is going to be a point to this. The way that I'm introing this, we're going to be in just a moment here going into. So you know how there's like there'll be what's discourse, the discourse you see on your general Twitter, and I'm used to like liberal discourse, which usually it's like, should we murder people? And people are like, no, and it's like, wow, what freaking discourse? But I'm seeing Marxist discourse, meaning Marxists who disagree with each other, and I'm seeing arguments where I'm like, man, you know, that they have some points, and I look at the other side and I'm like, you know, they have some points too, and it's a very different and refreshing situation to be in compared to the internet of the last few years for me.
It is what we are sold in school when you are exchanging ideas that don't immediately fall into line with one another. At least that's what was sold to me in school. It never happened, but that's what they said happened.
We're trying to have constructive conversations, people. But hey, who are you and what are we doing right now?
Hi, I'm Dragor, and at this point I've basically been saying it for a little while now. I have purposefully not been saying I'm a communist, and I've given up. I'm tired. Sure, communist, socialist. I do pick my audience, or I try to read the room for which one I'm going to say, because I don't want to court too much bullshit in one go. But
I say socialist to anybody who I don't already know their position.
Yes.
Like, yes, hello, I'm a socialist.
Socialist, or if I've heard them say a bunch of more informed things, I'm more likely to take a chance. But if I don't know, socialist or democratic socialist, you know.
I will not say I'm a democratic socialist.
Well, there's what the layperson hears as democratic socialist, which the layperson, in my experience, thinks that tends to mean direct democracy. And then there's what it actually means, which isn't that.
Which is arguably what we have in most of the Western world, especially in Europe.
Yes, but in the context...
We just have the worst version of it.
Right. In the context of the American political landscape, you have an entire populace that's going, oh, yeah, we want more Bernie democratic socialism, and that would improve things even if it doesn't get what you and I want, in full, anyway.
What they mean is they like left populism. Like the things people liked about Bernie Sanders, that he was out there like, let's actually get some shit done. And people are like, oh my God, I can't believe someone mentioned my bills, and not just like, we all need to adjust how we feel about our economy, which is what the Democrats seem to come out with every year.
Yeah. Who are you?
I am Pepper Coyote. I am here to tell you about a thing we're going to be doing August 6th.
Yeah.
There's a thing called the CPI, the Center for Political Innovation. They are having, I can't even call it a rally. It's, to be completely clear about what the thing is, you're going to go to a room in the Hyatt Regency Deerfield, which is in Illinois, pretty close to Chicago. It's like a suburb of Chicago.
A northwest suburb that is very affluent.
The Hyatt Regency Deerfield, you're going to go into a room and listen to some speeches. And you will applaud or not, or you take notes. This is not like a party. This is not, well, at least not a party in the celebration sense. It may lead to a political party, but we're going to be listening to some speakers. They have, I'm going to mess up this last name, Dan. It's either Kovalik or Kovalik. We got Tara Reid, who I'm super excited to hear speak. Garland Nixon and Peter Coffin so far have been announced as speakers. Caleb Maupin is almost, I mean, it'd be super weird if he wasn't there. He runs the CPI. We're going to be listening to some Marxist-Leninists give anti-imperialist talks. The event is called Unite Against the Imperialist, and it's singular because it's like, that's on purpose, which is fun. And it starts at 1 p.m. on August 6th. Yes. Unite Against the Imperialist, Hyatt Regency Deerfield in Illinois. You can find the full address online, and we will absolutely be there.
Yeah, Pepper
there isn't like a dress code or anything. but do not show up in fursuit or you just won't be allowed in. Like, it's
No,
not
I'm
because
going
we
to be
hate
in
you or
my
whatever.
jumpsuit bullshit as usual, and I will probably not be the most interestingly dressed person there.
I'm probably gonna do like, I don't know if I'm gonna do khakis, t-shirt, suit jacket, or if I'm gonna, no, I say suit jacket, it's like it's corduroy and green, but
Sure.
it's a suit jacket technically. Or am I gonna do jeans, Converse suit jacket? I have to have either a polo. I don't know. I want to look like 10% more serious than I usually do, and not even because like, oh, we have to conform to. When normal ass people see the meetings and they see a bunch of people in suits, they're gonna take it more seriously than if they don't, and that's kind of on them. It's not like on us, but
No,
we're
but
trying to frickin' reach people.
trying to reach people, and you can't ignore the fact that media will be spread about what we do, whether we like it or not, and we can have some agency in some of it.
Because they're not gonna play the audio.
Nope. Well, they'll play carefully constructed edits.
They'll be like, communism cut. It's like, yep, see, look.
No, they're gonna take communism cut, and then they're gonna edit imperialism is bad, and they're gonna give us, look, even the CPI, communism is bad. We don't need deep fakes for what they're about to do to us.
We got a couple of topics we're going to be going through today. Do you want to start with I only have the one. I have one really big thing I want to talk about, or do you want to start with you and make a sandwich out of my topic?
We started with a little bit of a tease and what I assume is actually going to be the opener, so let's go into it.
Okay, I'm going to try to take this step by step because there's a little bit of scaffolding needed because I've just been creating this. I've scaffolded myself to this point in the last week or so, and I'm going to do my best to, I don't know, explain it. Also, I am not. I put this disclaimer at the beginning of every episode, but when you hear me talking about theory, realize that this is kind of like a co-learning. I'm learning Marxism in the same way that a lot of people learned like video editing through like Googling a series of things and then doing it wrong for a while and going, oh shit, I should be doing it like this. Then you change that, and then you move. Like, this is a constant evolving process. Please do not take either of us as like professors. We're kind of figuring this out with you, and this is going to be the most inconsistent podcast ever. If people go back like years and go, let's see what Pep said in 2021 versus
we already
2030.
had that happen where someone took our episode before the Ukraine invasion, took things out of context, and went, see? We'd already gotten different information in that week. Holy shit. Imagine how different we will be next year.
We have a lot of different information about that situation right now, but I'm not even going to get into it. So there's a thing going on. Go for it.
No, I was going to say, I'm really curious to see what of that comes up at the meeting.
It's gonna come up. There's been a fight, actual left. I can't even say leftist because they're not really leftists. Actual, like, I don't know, Marxist infighting, disagreement, theory, dialectics. If you've been reading the theory, you'll remember, like, oh yeah, the idea that two different things can both be simultaneously true while seemingly contradictory, and then between the two of them you find like a greater truth by actually talking about shit. And I think a little bit of that is happening. At least it happened in my mind. The people who are trying to be productive. There are always people online trying to run around and get dunks, but for the most part, I'm trying to pull what is valuable from this. So, all right. We already have our two classes. We got bourgeoisie, we got proletariat. The way that I define classes, the way that Marx defines these two classes are your relation to the means of production. Do you work the means of production for a wage while not owning them at all? Or do you own the means of production and a bunch of people work them and you scrape off the excess value from the laborers? If we get a little bit deeper into that, Marx also talks about, you'll hear about the productive forces. Productive labor, the productive forces, things like food, gas, housing, like our absolute core basic necessities. And what got me thinking on this line, I happen to be reading this guy R. Palm Dutt, D-U-T-T. He has a thing called, Social Revolution and Fascism. And it's kind of a largish book, but it's at least like 1930s, written by a native English speaker. So like we're getting like more and more contemporary and easier to read. So as they're going through, this is also a thing Marx says, but Dutt was summarizing it, and this is kind of, I guess, actually a basic thing that I kind of just now picking up on. So Marx, we kind of see capitalism as just a bad. Capitalism is the same as bad. Like when we're complaining about a thing and say, oh, capitalism, what we mean is it's shitty, it's bad. If you go back far enough, capitalism used to increase the productive forces. If you go back to the 1700s and look at how many people it took to make enough calories to feed the population, it was far more people than are necessary in 1800, 1900. Now, capitalism took our productive forces from being like a couple guys with sickles out there, like threshing the wheat by hand, and then we got like factories to make more things so we could sustain a larger population. It increased the productive forces in the past. Old school, like even Marx was writing about it was starting to wind down, like late 1700s, early 1800s, capitalism. Then you get Lenin, who moves on and talks about, no, we've gone past just basic capitalism. We're talking about imperialism now. And in imperialism, those same productive forces are no longer being expanded. I mean, look at the US. Do we have more steel industry, more food production, more textile production? No.
In fact,
we actually have less and less. Like, if tomorrow the US was suddenly completely isolated and couldn't import or export anything, there's a whole lot of things that are a globalized, interconnected system united under the empire, imperialism. Like all this shit kind of happens in other countries now. So the reason that is significant is then you have unproductive and productive labor. What kind of job do you have? Do you have a job as like a coal miner or like the guy who drives or like a truck driver? Are you part of what Marx calls the productive forces? To try and draw a contrast here, does a cop do productive labor? Dragger, well, let's discussion here for a bit. Like cop labor, is a cop not selling their labor? You see what I'm getting at? Let's talk about it for a second.
Well, my mind immediately. So when this was first brought up to me, there are two things that jumped to mind before I would answer that question, and that is, what is production and what is the finite resource that doesn't care about the definition of production? And that is my time, your time. Time. Regardless of what you call it, how it is spent, and that is all. So in that regard, that's where I say, yes, the cop is selling their labor in that way.
Technically, a CEO sells their labor. I mean, most CEO, like actual big CEOs, they're also majority stockholders usually, or at least have a shit ton of stock. Like they are owners.
But they're, the absentee CEO that doesn't actually show up is not selling their labor. They're just owning something. But look, technically, Jeff Bezos doesn't have to do shit. And I assure you, he's in all of these meetings. He is still actually spending his time in a way that we would deem some form of labor by that definition.
I technically have, like, if you looked at my labor, the labor of like the labor of a musician, it is really hard to call my labor productive in the Marxian sense. Like, if tomorrow I never made another song again, like no factories would shut down, nobody would starve, nobody would be cold, freeze to death. So this all started centering on baristas, like Starbucks. Why does this become actually important? Because it has connotations for unionization. Obviously, me and Dragor support unions. We support unionization. But then people will bring up, well, the police have a union. What is different? Like, what is the actual material distinction between these?
Well, one is, as we've said before, just because there is a thing called a union, that says nothing about its internal organization and structure.
The AFL-CIO. Do we love them? No, we don't, everyone. That is fucking, they took over the worker movement of the 70s, and the capitalists were like, hey, work with us. And then they were like, they're concerned with what's called skilled labor and then non-skilled labor. And you're like, is that the same as productive and unproductive? It's like, no. They're actually very, very different ways of classifying shit. What's called skilled labor can be entirely unproductive, and with almost all of what is called unskilled labor, or should I say, almost all of what we would call productive forces is unskilled labor. It's the dude picking the carrots.
But there is no such thing as unskilled labor, but there's technically what we call. So
what they call it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So
anyway,
what does this actually mean? Because the argument that's being made online is, depending on how mean you want to go about it, is somewhere between any union that is not is not organizing the productive forces is either pointless or even harmful, which I disagree with. I don't see this as fucking harmful. Like the Starbucks union versus the Amazon union. That's the real life thing we're talking about with this subject. And the argument made is that the Starbucks union is essentially useless. It takes a bunch of service workers who are like almost definitionally unproductive forces in the Marxian sense. And then it compares it to organizing Amazon employees who are definite hard capital P productive forces. They like make the entire country run, and it's really hard to argue that they don't. Between packing it, shipping it. I mean, Amazon's infrastructure works better than like the US government's infrastructure when it comes to getting things done for the American people in a material sense.
I would actually counter that
Oh, please.
uh first of all, Amazon's infrastructure that they built was doing digital things on top of existing infrastructures. Remember, Amazon had no
Sure.
delivery of its own and made use of the excellent USPS delivery infrastructure.
And now they've moved past that. They've like developed
Well,
their
no,
own.
let's be honest. Did they move past it, or did they fund a bunch of lobbying for their favorite politicians to undermine the USPS while also building up their own? Point being, of the things they actually make and do, their system was only good at the time because at the time there was a thing that was doing it better than them, and now it isn't, and now even their system's crumbling. How many people continue today to complain about all of the fraud on Amazon, all of the misdeliveries? Even the Amazon's experience itself is crumbling.
So here is by the way, when I said lumpen proletariat, that's an actual Marxian term, and here's the Wikipedia definition.
Okay.
The underclass, devoid of class consciousness, kind of the peasantry. Because if you look at, I can definitely see. I mean, Marx did not imagine the current U.S. economy. Right now, 80% of American jobs are what we would call service jobs. We have a service economy. Back in the day, it was kind of flipped. It was more like 80% is what we call productive forces, people working in factories, and then like some service industries. But like waiters and waitresses, they're far enough removed from the means of production that I saw him defined online by this guy. Like he was describing them as mercenaries. It's like mercenary work. You show up and you don't even have solidarity with your other waiters because like tips are tips, and you're out there trying to scrap and fight for every bit of tip you possibly can. And then the back of house, the people actually making the food, are what they would call the productive for. They're productive labor because they're not service workers. You never see them. They get paid exactly the same no matter how they work, as long as they work, like as long as they're making food. And you could take all the waiters and waitresses out of a restaurant and just, basically become a Chipotle, become a counter serve thing where they just give you the food over the thing, the cook makes it and go burnt in a window, and the restaurant would still technically operate, versus if you remove the cooks and only have waiters, you don't have a restaurant.
Yeah.
So let me hit you with people more eloquent than me kind of breaking this shit down to like where it actually... You want me to skip? What do you think is your conclusion of this? Like, what do you think of this argument? Where do you come down on it and why?
So it's not so much an argument. I have a friend who is an archaeologist, and one of the things that when that friend's group of mine gets into various discussions, we always end up having to define terms. And so the thing that I see happening here is we have this definition of Marxism, Marx, Lenin. We have all of this stuff that did not account for what's happening today, and this argument is dealing with the fact that we do not have in our default language and analysis of applying communism and what we need to do to today. So 80% of our labor being service related means this discussion is a necessity. How we organize and tackle this is influenced by the fact that the system is such that when all of the baristas quit, what happens to the United States economy? Nothing, really.
Does it hurt Starbucks?
Does it? Yeah, and does it even hurt Starbucks? They'll survive. They'll figure out a way. And
you could go to a vending machine, basically. You could make Starbucks a vending machine model.
Yes.
So
you asked, like, where do I fall on this argument? And the argument is Starbucks unionizing good, neutral, or bad? And I still say it's actually explicitly good for the following reasons. One is, all right, capital knows it doesn't need these people, but it fights these unions anyway because of an imperialist, they need to maintain control, so any expression of fighting them must be stamped out. In that regard, having this fight at all brings visibility and teaches people about needing to organize. We don't even have the vocabulary and how we are all taught and brought up to be capitalists. We comment on this all the time. Any unions and getting spotlights for it is by default exposure and education to the rest.
I was going to say, what if you Starbucks? I think the crux of this, for specifically the Starbucks union, and you can kind of extrapolate this to any place of business, is if they get the union going, what happens with the packagers, growers, pickers, transport, everyone else, what you would call the productive forces of the Starbucks. Like, even if you went to vending machine model, somebody has to bring the beans to the store.
But
somebody has to put the beans in a bag.
Yeah.
But that's what and exactly, those are not the people currently being unionized. And
those
I think
are people that have even less agency than the people unionizing technically, because they're in even more exploited regions.
If they want to be a legit union that I can throw my full weight behind, they need to explicitly go after including those people. Kind of like how when we did our teacher strike, we explicitly went after bus drivers, lunch staff, janitorial, our quote-unquote productive forces of making a public school actually run. In the messaging from day one was, look, we need a 10% raise. They need like a 70% raise. Like, they're triple fuck.
Yeah, so like a Starbucks union, for example, would ideally involve, the shipping or the trucking that's bringing the product there.
So let me do a series of tweets of people who are, they've read way more of the theory than I have spent more time with it. The people who are talking in this are Peter Coffin and a guy named Logo Daedalus. Logo Daedalus is the kind of the catalyst of all of this. They're the ones who started jumping around with the Starbucks employees are service workers and not proletarians, therefore not proletarians. That's the controversial part. So like, they are service workers and also which is a subsect of the proletariat. He's since gone as far as to say, if you are not proletariat, you are bourgeois. And it's like, oh, so we're really gonna call like an Applebee's waiter bourgeois, a member of the bourgeois? Because if you flip that, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't say like, if you look at the definition of bourgeois and I don't fit it, does that make me proletarian? Because I definitely do not fit.
You tell me if you want to read stuff first, but there's a thing that I continue to really like Peter Coffin over that I think is good at bringing people into the fold. And that is to start with your definition of proletariat, it is based on your relation to capital, not what you produce. I like that.
Which is material. It's a material distinction as opposed to a moral or value-based distinction.
Yes.
Logo seems to be going towards, is the work you do good? And it's like, well, fucking define it. Like, what's good? Like, if it's relation to means of production, that's something I can point at that's material. Okay, so here's a back and forth between those two from like a few days ago. And we're kind of in the middle of a conversation, but you get where they're talking about here. So he says, correct. This is Peter talking. Correct. And the Best Buy guys owns the means of production, ? Because they're essentially talking about Geek Squad. They're like, what happens if you fix, like, if you work for Geek Squad for Best Buy? He's like, and Logo says, non sequitur. Tell me what the means of production are. I assure you that you are not using the term adequately. What is the means of production for installing a fucking Xbox, Peter? And Peter says, the apparatus to set up the interaction, the branding, the guarantees and warranties that come associated with it. So basically, Best Buy. You are talking about the creation of a service and the employee does not own it. If you work for Geek Squad, you do not own Geek Squad. And if you're a guy who freelance repairs Xboxes, you are not going to just get that work out of fucking nowhere. You're not going to take out an ad in the paper. Hi, I'd like to install your Xbox. I'd like to do freelance Geek Squad work. It doesn't happen. People go to Best Buy to get that service. They have the advertising budget. They have the TV commercials. They have created an entire means of production that has told people this is where you go to get your Xbox installed. That shit did not just manifest out of nowhere, and the Geek Squad employees, they do not own a means of production. They are simply working the Best Buy apparatus that is the means of production, to summarize and put words in Peter's mouth. Then Logo comes back with, branding is a means of production, Lamau. And it's like, not just branding, but like, can I take out a fucking Super Bowl ad for Pepper Coyote albums? No, but Bandcamp might.
Yes.
Actually, Bandcamp is now owned by Epic.
Yep.
So they really might. All right. So then we have Peter coming back. You think the Best Buy Genius service happens without Best Buy? Without it? You think the purchaser of the service isn't affected by this? And Logo says, is the production of branding, the production of value, and that's, hey, that becomes a fucking thing, is creating an advertisement for a product the same relation to the means of production as, say, assembling the product. Logo saying the real proletarian in this is the person who made the Xbox, which I don't disagree with. That person is proletarian. Peter, are they socializing production? Are they keeping the entire product of their labor? It really depends, doesn't it? Some probably are, and some definitely aren't. And that's where I am. It's like, it really depends. And then the final logo thing, no, it doesn't depend at all. Musicians are service workers and not proletarians. It's just like, no, you're wrong. And I'm like, oh.
So there's a line in there that is very fascinating, and I think it glosses over something I like to get into all the time. And the question was, is creating the ad creating value? And the answer is unequivocally yes. Why? Because what is the entire industry of advertising? What is the whole thing? Exploiting how the human brain works. There is only so much time in the day. There is only so many thoughts you can have. Priming is a thing, and exposure is a thing, especially in modern advertisement. So, to create the ad is to essentially also, in today's world, from my view, is to steal more time from you in a way that doesn't even involve a financial transaction. It is forced upon you. So, like,
Sure.
The ad is designed to encourage and get you to the financial exchange. Like, it's a piece of the puzzle explicitly. We've known this. We've known this
You're
socially.
saying that
This is how humans work.
You're saying that it is part of the means of production.
Absolutely.
I also didn't have a hard time. I didn't have a hard time making that jump when Peter first said it. It was like, because I'm sitting there like, what is the means of production of Uber? Because people who haven't thought about it much will go, oh, well, they own their car. They own the means of production. It's like, do they? Is really?
You can't just go around. Well, okay. If
You
you're
can't
Uber,
just go around and say, I'll give you a ride for $10. You can't do that. If you do, you'll be arrested.
That's what Uber did, because they're big enough and they're still fighting and paying off those lawsuits while raking in the cash. But if
They
you
did
or
it
I go
illegally.
do that, we will go to jail.
They have signs in every airport saying if someone is offering you rides, don't take it. That's illegal. You can't do that here. So does the worker own the means of production, or is the app, the branding, the advertisements, all of that shit that gets people to come to Uber and then eventually you get a nickel out of it, is that the means of production?
I think this is another example where we talk about, I don't know, it was a couple episodes where we were talking about China. And we were specifically talking about that the the social score in China being codified is not a good thing, in that that's a structure you can't consent out of it. Like, you're not consenting, you're forced into it. But then we also clearly said credit scores in America are functionally that, and it's implied. It's not explicit. So to me, this is another example of when you're in the 1800s, the means of production is easily explicit. And now we have all of these implied things that capital has obfuscated on purpose.
They might not have seemed as obvious at the time either. They
Right.
seem really obvious in retrospect, and they probably will seem obvious in another 50 years looking back at now. So I want to bring this back to a theory thing, because my final analysis, I guess, of why this whole like productive forces shit matters and you should be thinking about it and caring. This is back to Dutt. So we don't just not like capitalism because capitalism bad and makes me feel sad. It's because it is now, once we move from capitalism to imperialism, it no longer works to increase the productive forces of the world. It now, in fact, it starts to decrease the productive forces of the world. He had an anecdote about in the 30s talking about how the latest automobile manufacturing technology at the time could not be sold to Americans because it was too expensive. It was cheaper at the time to just keep your laborers going than to pay for equipment that did make it happen faster, but didn't risk cost benefit analysis. It didn't make sense. However, they could sell them to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was not profit focused. They were instead like, we need to make as many cars. We need to increase the productive forces. And you can never argue that the USSR did not do that for Russia. It increased the fuck out of the productive forces. At a point, capitalism, imperialism, starts to squash down those productive forces because they no longer are interested. It's not profitable to do so. You combine the tendency of the rate of profit to decline
Yeah.
which all of that sentence is the Marxian idea. The tendency of the rate of profit to decline. Like, that's an article on Wikipedia. You combine that with what we were just talking about, how as productive forces increase, the amount of human labor it took to produce all of our necessities in the 1800s was, much larger than what it currently takes. So what do we do with all of those, quote, extra superfluous workers? Communists want to put us to productive work because there are things that need produced. Like, look around the world, there's obviously productive work that needs done that isn't marketing or trying to sell somebody an iPad or whatever.
The shortcut version, do we have Star Trek yet? No. There are many productive things to do. More tangible. Are we still dying of things that we can throw brains at to try and research and get cures? Oh, yeah.
So then you get this question of, like, what does imperialism do with all of these quote-unquote superfluous workers? If it only takes 20% of your population, like in the US right now, to actually make and build the things, you have 80% of your population left. Why did we have the Great Depression? Because we had a lot of superfluous workers who couldn't afford to buy their own products. Like, I learned about that shit in junior high. This is just a more, detailed, nuanced, this is the socialist way of looking at that. At the time, we had nothing for our, quote, superfluous workers, so a ton of people just went hungry. Fascism is when imperial capital looks at your superfluous workers and says, let us kill them. Like, basically, like, the reason that Nazi Germany's economy, like, kind of worked out with exterminating a huge group of people is because, wow, that sure does eliminate your unemployment. Everybody had shit to do, and if you didn't, they would, you choose an arbitrary reason, an arbitrary group of people, and go after them to be exterminated, and that's fascism, basically. Like, oh, it's everybody who isn't white, or in another universe it could be everybody who isn't black, everybody who isn't fucking right-handed, everybody with it's arbitrary who gets destroyed. It's usually to do with your unique regions, like historical. Who's the historic
arbitrary
enemy?
Insofar as in the grand scheme of the universe, it doesn't affect anything, but contextually, they're gonna find it's always
historically
out of context.
Marginalized groups. Like, here it would be black people probably, or I don't know, gays. We'd pick somebody. Like, in each country has their own group.
Natives. We've genocided a few things on this soil.
Exactly.
Buffalo, our soil. We genocided our soil. Basically, it's not good for crops that much anymore.
We brought horses, and I say we, I mean Europeans in the 1600s.
Anyway, we were going towards fascism is extreme, and I think we're going to go somewhere else after that, or no?
Well, it kind of becomes a huge, important question, doesn't it? Because we require more productive forces. Our current system is trying to grind up. We're at 20% productive. Well, you know what I'm using my definitions. 20% productive forces. It's going to be less in another decade, and it's going to be less after that in another decade. What do we do with everyone then? Because people do need to work. The other option would be everybody works like an hour a week, and then we all have jobs, but we all get.
That's not how human brains work, though. That doesn't work.
It's not profitable. Oh, we would accept that. Are you shitting me? Everyone I know would absolutely accept a 1 hour work week.
A 1 hour work week doesn't work at sufficiently complex tasks. We know this.
Well, you know what I'm saying, though. Like, basically tag teaming it, so instead of having a cup, that 20% is getting their ass kicked. Like, they're having to work so hard.
No, what I'm saying is, Pepper, even tag teaming it is still going to continue down the path of, okay, now what? Because automation, we haven't hit any kind of wall of that. So, like, even that's a Band-Aid solution to what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And this is me getting into the thing I don't like to do, which is utopian thinking. What if? What will it be? Like, well, that's what it could be. Either everyone works a bit less and you spread it out, or you have this big chunk of people who just don't work. And what do you just let them all go homeless?
So what does history taught about the consequences of fascism?
It doesn't actually fully solve your issues.
No,
because it just
not
repeats
so much that
itself.
As to the people committing it. If they do take it to its logical extreme, for the most part, historically, they get taken out. There's a shit ton of pain and suffering on the way there, but eventually it always ends. And this leads to what we were kind of talking about earlier. I think there are people recognizing. So one of the things we talk about is the Malthusian people, who basically are, a bunch of people are going to have to die. Well, we know that a bunch of people dying, especially in this age of the internet, causes the whole world to look a little more, kinda. Like, if it happens on a big enough scale, there will be eyeballs. So, to me, I'm looking at what is going to be different this time. They still want to be in control. They know what happens when you take it too far and when you're explicit. So I think a lot of our implied structures of harm in the United States are reactions to, if you codify it, you get caught red-handed when it gets too bad. So we get to, not live well, god damn it, you said it earlier. Company towns, from the movie.
Oh, worry-free.
Worry-free.
Live well. Worry-free.
And this is also kind of something that the that fucking Firefly movie, Serenity, kind of was building towards. You can't kill your population, so you have to pacify them. Your 80% is not going to work, and you can't kill them. Damn, now what? And we're seeing parts of that play out. It's not given. There is the old style thinking, the Malthusians, the clear fascists that are on the way up and are doing what we have seen before. Exterminations are on their way if that's the arm that wins. Or we're going to get worry-free.
This is going to make me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you're thinking about the current material conditions of today, like when fascism was becoming popular, like capital F fascism, like Italy, Germany, like the originators, and when Americans were like, fascism sounds kind of good, like I've read the blah, 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 before the genocides had happened, and it was really easy to go, no, we can't kill 1 million Jews. That's not okay. Obviously, well, millions, I should say. What current thing, if I look at current, trains of thinking, malus, that would lead to a justified, like a popularly justified, where a whole lot of people would accept it, population reductions and forcing people into insane poverty and horrible conditions, that would be degrowth people. I can see climate change being used as justification to take actions that on their face are like, oh, well, we have to do this for pollution reasons. And unfortunately, it killed a fuck ton of Sudanese kids. Like, I think that's what it's going to look like. And the bad thing is, me saying that now, I would be labeled as like a right-wing conspiracy. Oh, you're a climate change denier. Not at all what I said.
No. Climate change is very real, and it's hurting us. And the whole fucking globe needs to get with the program.
Do we use it as an excuse to cull a population? Or do we use it as like, holy shit, this is like the new moon race. We got to all get together and figure out nuclear fusion.
The anti-GMO crowd effectively is falling on the side of Malthusian. Why? Because it is explainable in gut reaction terms on why an average person might go GMO bad. Why? Because places like Monsanto get patents and copyrights for their strains of corn that cannot reproduce on their own, and that if it ends up growing in someone else's field and they find it, they go to that farmer and go, you're infringing our patent, and they fuck that person. You know what GMOs also allow us to do?
Grow shit in dry conditions?
Hang on, I have a link for this. Let me bring it up here.
I think I say I have a list. I have a list of the things GMOs do, and I'll be saying every single one of them.
Not every single one of them. Hang on. I
highly respect pro-GMO vegans, because we can at least have a conversation. Like evangelical
supercharged biotech rice yields 40% more grain, and the key one that you're going to hear more and more, we've talked about it a little bit, is nitrogen in the soil is becoming worrisome. And not only does this strain do that, it seems to make better use of the nitrogen it is given. This is GMO. This is what it can do for us. We can GMO to have superfoods that help us. The science itself is not bad. It's not good either. It's just a thing we can do. It's our application of it.
Everything we eat today is a GMO. Like, we've all heard it before. None of our food looked like this 500 years ago.
It didn't look
not
like
even
this
close.
Even 70 years ago. Apples did not look the way they do 70 years ago.
Yeah, you'd have this hard, tasteless, whatever you could just barely chew, and that's like an orange.
Well, that's a little bit more than 70 years ago. I use apple as the site of, like, we have been eating apples for hundreds of years, but they're at where they have grown in size and increased in overall sugar content has been a more recent development.
Cap to this, because I want to go to topics that aren't just mine. At the end of the day, we know, so we talk about climate change is coming and everyone's going to die. Well, the climate change is coming, but everyone isn't going to die. If using the we're all going to die as this like quick, everyone panic and no one think is how you can get this weird, a new form of fascism that looks what we would call, I guess, left today, whatever the fuck, that looks woke, that uses things like climate change as an excuse to allow Elon Musk to build his fucking bunker where he gets to live and everybody else, and then we're raising Africa and parts of South Asia. Fuck it. Like, we are going to survive climate change. There will still be people. And the things we need to be looking at are like what Dragor just said. Maybe we could come up with new kinds of crops that will work with this changing climate. Maybe we can come up with kinds of buildings, air conditioning technology, moving people away from where it is definitely going to flood. If you resolve yourself to the we're all going to die, we're all fucked anyway, that gives people license to not act and not hold their governments accountable for doing better. And yes, none of this can be accomplished with our current imperialist government. China, though, is doing shit at least. Like, at least someone in the world is taking some kind of steps. America's like, oh, we're all just fucked. I guess we'll have a cool party as it burns down. And China's like, no, we're all gonna be here and we're gonna have to deal with this shit. So let's come up with
So here's what you should tell people. If someone says, we're all gonna die anyway, you go, no. What is genetically true about human history? I'm going to get the actual number wrong, but you can genealogically, fuck that word. You can trace back our genes and all of humanity to anywhere from 11 to 17 women. All humans today, some event, we don't know, not even real. Some event, but like our genetic history, we can trace back to 11 to 17 women. We're not all going to die from climate change. It's just those 11 to 17 for the next iteration of us is going to come from people picked by the likes of billionaires. Is that what you want for humanity?
All right, next thing. You want to talk about Cuban drugs or something else?
Fuck yeah.
That's a quick one. Cuba, good news. I'm just going to read the press release. The English is a tiny bit janky because it is translated. This is from a website called Granma, GRANMA.cu. So it is a Cuban website. So it's entirely fake and this is all made up, right? Cuba will begin clinical trials with a drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. For the first time in Cuba, the patient will undergo a molecular and clinical diagnosis for this disease. Cuba will soon, this came out July 20th of this year, Cuba will soon begin phase 3 clinical trial of Neural CIM, the commercial name of Neuro EPO, the Cuban drug against Alzheimer's disease. It also apparently has Parkinson's in there too. I'm not a doctor. For which the classification of patients who will participate in the study begin in Havana. So they're announcing, all right, we're picking our people and we're going to do the trial. And this has been a very promising drug. That's the reason I keep talking about it, because like it's moved to human trials now. And we're like, holy shit, will we actually have a quasi-effective treatment? Because there's nothing for Alzheimer's, as I'm sure anybody who's heard of the disease is aware. Although this preliminary screening does not mean the full start of the clinical trial, it is an important step to advance the correct diagnosis of patients and in the identification of the population to be included, explained to the press Dr. Khaled Leon Monzon, the first deputy director of the Center for Molecular Immunology. Patients interested in being evaluated to be included in the clinical trial can request an appointment in the Medical Surgical Research Center. And in the, you ready for me to just pronounce some fucking names? Salvador Allende, Manuel Fajardo, and Hermanos, this is the hardest one, Amaikhairas hospitals and the Institute of Neurology. And all their hospitals are named after revolutionaries, and it's kind of badass.
That's awesome.
I'm going to stop there, but like, hey, good news. We might soon have, this is also like a nasal spray, by the way. That's it. That's how you do the drug.
So I posted 2 links directly related to this in the chat, and this is why I wanted you to go first. And one is from the Daily Kos. 2 decades of Alzheimer's research may be based on deliberate fraud that has cost millions of lives. Last month, drug company Genentech reported on the first clinical trials of the drug crenezumab, a drug targeting amyloid proteins, blah, 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 for Alzheimer's, particularly effective in animal models, but it did not work. There's some other stuff around that. One of the key lines I like from this article: over the last 2 decades, Alzheimer's drugs has been notable for mostly having a 99% failure rate in human trials. It's not
Yeah.
unusual for drugs that are effective in vitro and in animal models to turn out to be less successful when used in humans, but Alzheimer's has a record that makes the batting average in other areas look like Hall of Fame material. And now we have a
Ooh,
good idea why. Because it looks like the original paper that established the amyloid plaque model as foundation of Alzheimer's research over the last 16 years might not just be wrong, but a deliberate fraud. The suspicion was
I'm
something more than a little wrong with the model, and almost all of its Alzheimer's research funding, 1.6 billion in the last year alone, began with a fight over the drug Simufilam. And really, what basically it gets into is there's a bunch of stock purchase stuff and a bunch of capitalists with interest in something getting to market and being good and blah, blah, blah.
well, let me like in to immediately answer the question of how could a pharmaceutical company extract an assload of capital from America using this and Medicare's coverage decision for the new Alzheimer's drug and why it matters. Apparently, this drug, which costs, if I read right, $6,000 per dose,
Yeah.
is apparently going to overall increase the total cost of Medicare by itself. Like, it being covered is just gonna astronomically and I'm not cynical or conspiratorial
what
enough.
has both parties been trying to do for the last 50 years? Kill Medicaid. This is how
That's what
they
I mean.
found it.
Is this to kill Medicaid with help from a shitty drug company, or is it a drug company going, man, this shit's going away soon. Let's grab it while we can. Let's smash
Why
and
not
grab.
both? Why
It
not
probably
both?
is. That's the thing. Because these aren't moral decisions getting made by an evil cabal. They are simply interest-based decisions getting made by business people. They don't care what happens to Medicaid next year. They just know they can make that money right now. So they're doing it.
Yeah.
Hurry.
The other one I
Shit.
linked is real peer review has never been tried. And this is an ongoing thing that we've talked about here and there, where what do you do with your 80% when all of your human needs are taken care of by your 20%? Well, we have a lot of quote unquote science that needs double, triple, quintuple, and 10x verification, perhaps even on regular intervals as humanity learns stuff. The number of
Sure.
times we've had to change a foundation of our scientific understanding because we hit that big of a breakthrough doesn't happen every year or every decade, but it happens often enough that when it does, you need a mechanism in place to go re-review what you thought were premises. This article here is the scary thing saying we have not been doing any of that at all for a while because capital does not. There's no money to be made from going, yes, ibuprofen works as we thought it did 100 years ago.
Sweet. Again, not that we're saying that we should just take Cuba and copy paste it onto America, because that wouldn't work, because Cuba has its own unique history, separate and different from the unique history of the United States. But they are not bankrupting themselves. They're bankrupting their only national healthcare program to enrich an upper class to enrich an upper class of pharma executives based on now it sounds like provably false research.
Here's one. We were talking a little bit about it requires historical context to understand what fascism targets. And you can see that coming back again at queer people here in, at the very least, the United States, for sure. So I linked a tweet, and it's basically on Twitter, groomers is trending, and the first post that shows up is an ABC article about children getting monkeypox. That is not an accident. Monkeypox spreads via air, not just contact. It spreads very easily through physical contact. And so, if you fuck
Jesus,
someone,
is it another mask disease?
Yes, it's smallpox.
Aerosolized?
Yeah. And so I don't know how true this is as far as the spread, but it was getting noted, monkeypox was getting noted in Germany. Then there was IML, International Mr. Leather, or maybe it was IMR, International Mr. Rubber. And a bunch of people descended and gathered, and then that turned into an outbreak, and then they've been traveling all over the United States, and that seems to be one of that. Like, that's the one we know about. So this is what the media is intentionally using for the next building of scapegoat for the fascist arm of what's going on with late stage capitalism. is they're saying it's a gay disease again. No. One, there's no such thing. Two, it spreads by air. They're selling it as only the icky gays get it, and it's going to turn into a social phenomenon of you're not going to even tell anyone you have monkeypox because it's the gay disease. This is AIDS all over again. Only way more contagious.
They're signaling how they're not going to do shit about another pandemic. This is a
Correct.
tweet I read. I'm just summarizing, but they're signaling that they're not going to do anything about this pandemic either by one, falsely labeling it as entirely skin to skin, which you just said, and two, kind of being like, yeah, but only the degenerates can get it. Like, only gays.
But I just stayed in a hotel. Ah, you stayed in a gay hotel. Fuck you. You didn't have the money. You didn't have the money to stay where you could be safe. You're a poor. You're a dirty gay
bed
poor.
bugs. I got bed bugs from what's supposed to be like a nice hotel.
All it takes is one asshole with bed bugs in a nice hotel, and then there you go.
Man, and you're talking about kids. When right now school is at a session, which is kind of a secret blessing in a lot of places that there aren't skin to skin contact. Oh my god, kids touch fucking everything. They just they rub their gross faces and hands on all over each other all the time. So like you're gonna have a bunch of kindergarten through 5th grade, actually probably all of schooling, but like these big school outbreaks, and then yeah, oh, did some gay give all of the children monkeypox?
All right, I'm just gonna go into headlines. I have a couple of things gathered, and I'm gonna shout out to the folks that shared these in the Teehee LinkedIn channel of our Discord. So if you are a patron for $1 or more and want us to tackle either I don't promise where these things end up. It's based on our individual interest with a particular link. But if you share links, they very likely, at the very least, will end up in this headlines section. First up is this YouTube video that was shared with us by Misfit Raider, and it is Texas GOP convention embraces far-right platform. And by now, you probably, maybe, have heard about the various bets on, this whole, and it's not even new or embraced. It's kind of the same stuff that's been going on. My interest in this is how CBS is actually presenting it more than the actual far right embraces Jesus again. Like, okay, that's not new. That's been going on since before I was born.
Gotta scare us into voting for these bitches.
Bingo. Bingo. This is CBS. This is a liberal piece of media aimed at vote blue no matter who people. Did you have any? You said it. I'm just going to go on to the next one.
Well, I could add in, because you just said vote blue no matter who.
Yeah, do it.
Another example of that not actually even being the thing. It's only vote blue no matter who when the Democrat is a piece of shit. But if the Democrat actually coincidentally has some cool policies, suddenly it's like, oh, we need to keep these dangerous radicals. Geoff Young won the Democratic nomination for the U.S. House of Representatives in Kentucky's 6th Congressional District, May 17th of this year. He will face the incumbent, Republican Andy Barr. Andy Barr is kind of a known... he's one of those guys. In the general election on November 8th, his platform calls for abolishing. This is the Geoff, the Democrat, the guy who won the primary. He wants to abolish the CIA, cut the military budget, end U.S. support for AFRICOM, which is where we're fucking around in Somalia, and taxing the rich more. Unsurprisingly, Kentucky's Democratic Party establishment says it won't support Young in the general election against his Republican opponent. Yep. Arizona, I just had to fill out a primary ballot where there were no candidates run for my my federal House of Representatives. It just says no candidato.
Yep.
I'm like, awesome. Fucking, oh my god. They're definitely fighting to stop fascism from entering America.
Hey,
like, if the shit is that important, Pepper, act like it.
Pepper, speaking of stopping fascism, there's a bunch of these January 6 hearings going on. And also from Misfit Raider is GOP Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin wanted to hand-deliver alternate fraudulent electors to Vice President Mike Pence ahead of the joint session of Congress, according to texts the committee provided. And I'm sitting here...
What if that guy's going to go to jail?
I'm sitting here going at this point, we kind of talked about it and called it kind of when January 6th happened of not only are there not going to be, for the most part, real consequences. A couple of figurehead people will probably go to jail here and there, but ultimately, this is all being used as a taking up time taking up mind share of something that is very important and to go over, but we're just getting circus. We're not. We went through how long of New York's going to go after Trump, and once Trump's not president anymore, oh, they're going to get him. They're going to get him.
Yeah.
There is never a consequence. Ever. When they do get them, when I say there is never a consequence, I mean systemically there is never a consequence. Individuals sure suffer consequences. There will be some figurehead Republicans that don't make it out, and the party's going to go, well, of course that thing was wrong. They did that one thing wrong, implicitly saying if they didn't say it out loud, they would be fine.
We have irrefutable evidence of insane. Everyone talks about George W. Bush as a war criminal. Yes, though, but that's not just like a meme. Actually, how come all U.S. presidents haven't gone to jail when they leave office? If they weren't going to do W. Bush for killing literal millions of fucking people, they probably aren't going to do Trump for like fucking up their bourgeois, tipping one of their spinning plates of nonsense. They're like, not that Trump was good, he didn't go in to do this, but when people talk about him like shaking up the system, he did shake up the system. He made them unable to start any new wars for his entire presidency. Biden has already started bombing new countries. Like, it's not that I want Trump back, it's just trying to pretend that the Democrats are somehow the good guy is getting fucking sickening.
And it already was bad if you already were in the know, but then you just keep looking and you're like, it is worse and quicker.
Kids are not out of cages.
All right, next one. Next one comes from H3, and it is an article about the breakdown of a McDonald's hamburger and cost and wages. And this ties into what we had.
Service.
What?
Today, just in the whole like service employee versus proletarian discourse, there was a guy, Johnny Socialism, an account that I enjoy. He's going basically making the argument of like, do you think people? Because they'll talk about how service workers create an experience. The guy Logo, who started the whole thing, has now kind of synthesized his analysis down to like, America is Disneyland, and in Disneyland you have your front of house employees who like are basically actors, your cast members, and then you have when the park closes, the fuckers who actually clean the park, restock the thing, make the food, the people you never see. And they argue that McDonald's employees are a front of house; they're a cast member, who are like waiting for, and it's like, that you're paying for an experience, that they don't actually create any value, that the value is the experience, and experience is valueless because it's just putting on a show for you. And it's like, look, if you're sitting in the fucking drive-thru trying to get your McMuffin and get the hell out of there, you're getting experience? No, you're there because it's the cheapest food and you need to get it, eat, and then go to your proletarian work. And so what are they saying about breakdown?
I find it fascinating that to get back to that, I find it fascinating to get to that part of the argument where to me, that's at that, you are intentionally unlearning what humans learned from assembly line work. The assembly line and like us inventing process effectively as a society is one of the greatest inventions we had. You know, we were talking about capitalism going from feudalism. Well, it's not. Capitalism is what made use of the socialized production. We already were doing, go to different areas all over the world at different time periods, and we're starting to figure out socializing production is good.
Work as a team, divide labor up, everyone does their thing, pass it on.
So in the drive-thru example, if you only have the chef in back, you don't have the manpower to serve the material need of the line of cars, and then the capitalists go, well, in our immediate this week, we made less money. So like, in that immediate of the week, if every McDonald's and Starbucks worker goes on strike immediately, Starbucks profits will dip that week. Okay, fine.
Absolutely.
They will find a way out of it to continue existing for sure, but that's not their ideal state of affairs. They have a plan for next quarter. There will be about this many people getting coffee, this many people going to McDonald's. The article linked is very fun because the conclusion at the end is not about what materially the McDonald's worker is providing, but based on the cost of all of the money flowing through, how much is being stolen from you as the worker.
Surplus value being extracted
Surplus
from labor.
value. It's a wonderful, wonderful example of it. Then my last one, I think, for tonight, we'll see if I'll go to these others afterwards, comes from Jesse.
Before you go from McDonald's.
What?
So My
Oh,
argument with the service worker v proletarian, if you go to play, if when you start getting specific and actually talk about, okay, what labor does a McDonald's employee does? Because if you want to say that they're entirely service, entirely providing an experience as like a burger host, and you go to McDonald's for the experience of being in the McDonald's and the burger host and all that shit, well, even logo is like, well, the people who stock the shelves and drive the trucks and all the and like clean the blah blah, those are the proletarians. Like, well, when I worked at Burger King, I was front of house. I would take orders. I would make the actual sandwiches. I would assemble machine. Like if they got a new thing, nobody's coming to put it together. It's just me. I would clean the thing. I would like scrape out the blah. I'd take out the Like I definitely did work that no one could not call proletarian, productive labor, stuff that McDonald's actually definitely needs. Even if we were all replaced with a vending machine, someone would still need to do this work. So like, what percentage of my time needs to be on what kind of labor
yeah.
for you to give me some goddamn respect? Is what I'm talking about.
I love it. I love it. This last one comes from Jesse, and my little note for myself was positive propaganda, and I say that very intentional. And it's got a couple of flyers that are seen in Washington, D.C. And they're all red, white, and blue colored because, hooray, American patriotism. What creates public safety? Transportation. Safe, reliable, free for all. Rails, not jails. Americans face some of the highest rates of traffic death in the world, but surveillance and enforcement won't make our roads safer. Instead of funneling more money into already enormous police budgets, let's spend our tax dollars to design safer streets, expand our transit network, and make public transit free for all. Reliable, diverse, and well-financed transportation options are what keep our communities mobile, healthy, and connected. What creates public safety? Health care for all. Care, not cages. Only dedicated investments into care and support of our neighbors will break the cycles of poverty and distress that prompt so much violence and conflict in our neighborhoods. We can't mend wounds with mace. We can't cure cancer with cop cars. A healthy city is a safe city. And the last one. What creates public safety? Food. Nutritious, fresh, and abundant. We can't eat pepper spray. Hunger is a violent consequence of poverty that stalks the American working class, and this killer won't be stopped by the police. In fact, neighborhoods with heavy police presence also suffer the most from nutrition inequity. We must end food deserts and build robust nutritional support programming to make sure our neighborhoods are nourished. Full bellies make healthy communities. And all of this is for defundmpd.org. Pepper, what are your thoughts on this positive propaganda?
It's like asking how do you stop mass shootings in America? And if your entire thing is either more police or remove all guns, one doesn't work provably and the other one is kind of like practically impossible, at least in the US. Yeah, if you want to start combating crime, I would argue you do the same thing it's going to make fewer people will be sympathetic to this, but I would say all social issues that are social, poverty, petty crime, like racism, people being assholes. It's not that being poor makes you racist or makes you an asshole, but we can actually work on those issues once all of our necessities are taken care of. It's really hard to play this like, did they do a crime because they are a criminal and bad, or did they do a crime because they needed the money to supply their basic needs? And if you have everyone's needs supplied for, like through us working together and making it happen. It's not nanny state. Everyone simply has their shit delivered to them. Like people are supplying their own basic needs through their own labor and like work in their own communities. Then it's a lot easier to weed out, hey, this guy just keeps like fucking around. Like this guy's just being an asshole. He's just doing crime for no reason. And then you can actually address that. Because I mean, how many 99 times out of 100, when you go and get criminals off the street, they're doing it because they don't have means. They don't have food, or they owe somebody money, or they're in some situation, or they're addicted to whatever. And it's very rarely, this person is just bad, so they decided to go be bad.
The only way where that really regularly takes hold is if you're in the ruling class.
Yeah, they
and
do
it's
all
even
kinds
not
of
that
shit
you're
just for the hell
deciding
of
to be
it.
bad, it's that you lack empathy, and the choices you're going to make, we know consistently are going to harm others.
If you get on the Lolita Express, that shit is a choice, 100%. No one is coercing you to go rape people with Jeffrey Epstein.
True, but no, in all sincerity, part of the whole billionaire thing is a power dynamic, and the last bastion of power dynamic, once you have all the money and power, you can exercise is basically your next move is to rape children. That's why so many of them do.
You just become bored and you have no actual problems. And hell, even the bourgeois, they're not, like we talk about labor alienation, they don't have labor. And I think it sounds better when I say it. It sounds more poetic when I say a man without, I don't mean literally man, you know what I mean? A man without his labor is not, like, you're not a human. Like, part of what makes humans humans is that we labor, we work, we make things, we make our houses, we do crafts. Since the beginning of time, we've been etching shit in cave walls.
People call stoners lazy, and look at all the different ways they know how to smoke that shit.
Yeah, I'm about to drill a hole in a pineapple.
I've got two more quick things. One we already talked about was Amazon is acquiring a medical company. And then, actually, no, we did completely talk about that. The last one is, again, a little example of what we talk about of unionizations being not are they effective or not, of where do they fall as far as attacking the underlying systems that make us need to discuss unions to begin with. And this is about a Dave Chappelle show that was at the First Avenue, a venue, has been canceled and is moving to the Varsity Theater. To staff artists in our community, we hear you and we are sorry. We know we must hold ourselves to the highest standards and we know we let you down. We are not just a black box with people in it, and we understand that First Avenue is not just a room, but meaningful beyond our walls. Blah, blah, blah. Long story short, Dave Chappelle was supposed to be there, and the staff called out and refused to work, and their workers' solidarity caused an effect. And the note I wrote for it is, I like that at any given music venue, my understanding is there is an owner, and the owner may or may not be involved. They might cursory glance at who's getting booked, but even they're not doing the booking, but they're the owner. And as you go down throughout any music venue, it sucks more and more and more for you. So to have everyone come together and exert their will together is cool. But there's nothing talking about addressing the fact that for the next show, they go back to having no agency. They have to walk out again. They have not addressed why this situation happened to begin with. Because the owner knows Dave Chappelle, shit or not, is probably going to pack seats and is going to draw a lot of controversy. Why wouldn't they? Pepper.
We're in a weird situation where materially, like, yes, this particular venue, the workers banded together and said, we don't want this, and they got their particular venue to not have that show. What happened was the next venue over just picked up the show. The end of that thing is like, if you want to get your ticket, swap to this venue, call this number, blah, blah, blah. And this, I don't mean to make everything about this, but it's all I'm thinking of. Everybody in that situation who had that, they exuded their power, but that was the power as far as it goes as them as service workers. Yeah. Everybody working that venue is a service worker. The only person there who was like a means of production person is Dave. Like, Chappelle himself is like, if I speak into the microphone, we are producing the comedy. Like, and all he has to do is just go down the street to another place with a microphone and they will continue. I mean, I'm glad it's cool for them. Hopefully they see like the value in, hey, we all wanted a thing and we all teamed up and we made that thing happen.
From the educational standpoint. Yeah, like take that as a kernel of, but now what if it was every show you had a say?
And it seems to be this venue has a unique, like it's historic. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page. It's been there like forever, since it was a bus depot until 1968. And so I assume they have that these employees have more power somehow than if it was a conventional, you're talking about like an owner employees where the owner would say, no, fuck you, show up or you're fired. Like, it seems like their structure already was a little bit more democratic than just that. So if you work at the right kind of venue and happen to have a bunch of like same thinking employees, you can get a show moved down the street.
So anyone who was relying on that money that weekend ain't getting it. How many of those people are working the other venue?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, how many of them just went down the street like, all right, I'll bartend.
Like, fuck Dave, but I gotta pay rent.
I gotta pay my bills. Because that's the inverse of this. What if they let the show happen? Are we gonna shit on all the like roadies and shit that made this show happen because they needed the paycheck? Ow. Whole situation's a bummer. It is fun that Chappelle has gone from, I say fun, that's not even the word I want. It's depressing because I don't talk
we
about it
choose
much,
to
but
take
I'm a
some amusement
stand-up.
and laugh at it instead of cry.
I'm like a scholar of stand-up. I was reading before I was studying Marx theory. I was studying stand-up. I was reading autobiographies of blah, 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 of like freaking Steve Martin and various. I followed all kinds of like indie comics, and for all like I definitely would have said, and yeah, I'd still say if you asked me a few years ago that Dave Chappelle was like the best living stand-up,
He was for
and
quite a while.
now he's gone into he's built so hard into reactionism that it's now his brand is I'm the guy who hates trans people.
But it's not even well, let's end on this little bit. How much of it is Dave chose to go into reaction? Like, of course he has agency in it, but how much was there already not just groundwork of other people doing it, but there is an entire system, an entire media machine that is able to turn that outrage into butts and seats. Materially, how is Dave doing right now, even if we don't think he's funny?
This is why you got to have ideology. Dave had a bunch. You can go back and look at these bits where you're like, yeah, man, he's like a completely freaking on point, and a lot of his material on race is completely on point and freaking shaped my views on race. Even like listening through Dave Chappelle telling his bits, I'm like, holy shit! Like that's what helped me understand what we call white privilege is like Dave Chappelle bits.
Yes, that was some of the early of like, wait a minute. The world is not like this for other people. Got it.
The cops don't treat us all the same. Holy shit. I went from finding those I rolled my eyes at those bits to being like, oh, fucking like snaps. Like, yeah, I know what you're talking about in this situation. And if Dave had gotten some kind of glimmer of radical ideology, if it was years ago and he like ended up in the Black Panthers or something, or like was following Malcolm X or any other of these Marxist like revolutionary leaders, he wouldn't just go, I have a bunch of money now. I feel bored. Who are my problems? The poors. They cause my problem. He wouldn't be going to town hall meetings, shooting down affordable housing and shit getting built in his little Ohio town. He wouldn't be going on doing the fucking transphobia tour Mark 7. You gotta have principles. David doesn't have principles. He has money and is like a bit smart.
I will say one asterisk to that, and this is Dave Chappelle specific, and that is, regardless of the material stuff, a thing that has been true to him and has been his voice is a bunch of not great queer stuff. He actually has a history of that.
Sure.
The current climate makes him leaning into the trans stuff as well, that's what's going on. So there's an alternate universe where that's not the centerpiece of his stage show, but I guarantee you he would still have those thoughts because it's in line with how he phrased those other things as well.
It is like if we were in the 60s and he was not doing material on the civil rights movement. Like, the shit, that's what's happening, and he's going to be doing those bits because that's what the discourse is. It just happens that he's on the wrong fucking side of it because he doesn't have a principled ideology that, like, guides him towards the not wrong side of it. This is how you don't end up just taking shots in the dark, people. You start coming down on the wrong side of history accidentally less and less if you learn history. That's what the value of Marxism is. It's not an ism in the same way that like Catholicism is an ism. It's an ism in a scientific sense. It is an area of study. It is stuff that you can replicate in different places through the scientific method and produce similar results. It's not just grasping at straws. It's not tarot cards. It's not tea leaves. The shit they were saying in the 1850s had enough truth in it that we are still talking about it because our system has really not changed that much. Only the technology has.
Well,
it's been a good week.
That's a good end. I like that.
Nice. I feel like I said something there.
You did. I like
Thank you all for being here. If you want to go to the CPI thing, listen to a bunch of speeches by some Marxist-Leninists, and freaking Tara Reid's going to be there. Tara Reid, she's the lady who's like, so Biden sexually assaulted me, and everyone's like, la la la, we cannot hear you. And then it fucked up her whole life. Like, she's just treated like shit by the media. She's been, oh my God, not that cyberbullying is the worst thing that can happen to you, but it's all happened to her.
Oh yeah. It has very real effects.
I was going to say Dearborn, Michigan. That's not it.
No.
Deerfield, Illinois.
There are multiple ways to get there. Look it up. Google Maps. There are multiple trains that'll get you there. You can drive there. It is not Chicago. To be fucking clear, as someone who just had to live through the 4th of July shooting in Highland Park and listen to the whole fucking world go, oh my God, look at Chicago. No, like two reasons. One, that's not Chicago. Fucking stop. Two, That was an affluent neighborhood. 3, that is specifically a rather Jewish neighborhood, which is in context what makes that shooting even worse. That was a white supremacist shooting. Deerfield is an affluent northwest white suburb of Illinois. It is not Chicago.
Everybody, I hope you have a good week. Thank you very much for listening, and maybe we'll see you in Chicago in August.
I've been Dragor.
I have been Pepper. Bye.